and welcome to another edition of the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Red Pill, joined as always by my co-host, Dr. Benway. Dr. Benway, how are you this fine morning for me, evening for you?
I'm looking forward to eventually falling asleep, but there will be a good conversation beforehand.
Okay, we've been forewarned that a good conversation is coming. Yeah, because we were talking just before we started the episode, and we usually, this is how we usually do it. We sort of like, at the last minute, gather up a topic and just run with it. And the topic that we're both actually interested in, I think that I'm surprised that the good doctor is as interested in it as I am, is the issue of the DIY aesthetic of so much of social media. And this DIY media is more popular than straight media, which is, of course, hyper-produced and very smooth and slick. And I am kind of wondering, why is it that people like it so much and they follow it so much? Doctor, what are your thoughts on this issue?
Well, this came up from two ideas. One, it was the natural follow-up of our discussion on the late-night talk show hosts and how I think they don't really fit very well in our current world, not the least of which because the people running it are assholes, but not in like a good old-fashioned Hollywood asshole, like I just want to get ahead, like more like assholes as in they hate the people they're forced to entertain assholes, which is an unforgivable asshole.
Yes, by the way. I agree.
I was thinking in like, well, what's going to replace it? And I was reminded of two shows, one of which is a podcast and one of which is I guess it's sometimes a podcast, sometimes a show on YouTube. And those are, well, the first one is the Gilbert Gottfried Amazing Colossal Podcast, which is frankly one of my favorite shows that I watch.
Okay.
And the other one is Norm Macdonald's show, which, funny enough, after we had observed Michelle Wolf getting kindly shown the door, I think I read somewhere that Norm's show is transitioning to Netflix. And what's good about Norm's show is that it's not like there's no money in it, right? You have a good quality camera, competent people behind the scenes who at least know what they're doing, but it's not like fancy produced camera movements and music and everything. It's still like you have competent people with the camera on Norm, and he's not heavily following a script, and you just have a bunch of interesting people goofing off and having a comfort in the level that while a number of people are watching this, it's not everybody watching it. So fuck it. We're just going to have some fun.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of nice, wonderful lunacy.
Yeah.
And Gilbert's like that too. Although the added flavor with Gilbert is that because Gilbert is so interested, like I am, in the minutia of old Hollywood and old television, that, he will not only bring on like Bill Macy, who was the husband from Maude and like the most Jewish man you will ever encounter.
Okay.
But he has him twice, and they're all talking about like all of the people they worked with, and James Karen I think was even talking about when he met Buster Keaton and all of this other weird stuff. And that it's like you're free to just go into this deep minutia and fuck it. Everybody's the people who know this podcast are going to enjoy it. The people who think, well, why isn't it more like this or more like that? They to hell with them. They don't need to listen.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, the fact that there are no more gatekeepers like before means that all kinds of weird audiences can find their weird little niche, their weird little avatar, if you will, which I find, incredibly fascinating because the variety of the human experience is so much greater than I had been led to believe, because I grew up in the 70s and 80s and the gatekeepers ruled. And so the culture that I got on television, in books and magazines and what have you was, very limited, very, very mainstream. And, in the 90s, especially the aughts and the teens, where you've had this explosion of all kinds of just niche groups, niche entertainers who find an audience, a virulent audience, a raucous audience who adore them, right? And they have like the weirdest things. I mean, look, the thing that I usually point to as the obvious example of this is sexual fetishes. Because, like when I was growing up, it was just, Playboy and maybe Penthouse, right? And that was it insofar as porn was concerned. But now you have got all kinds of crazy-ass porn. I mean, shit that I couldn't even believe. When I heard about vor, which is the idea of people being devoured, I thought, how on earth could this possibly be, some kind of pornographic interest? But that points to the fact that humans' interests, human variety, is so almost infinite in its weird bizarreness, right? And so that's what I like about the social media, that there's so much. On the other hand, sometimes the fact that there's so much is overwhelming, because then you get to a point of you don't know where to begin. For instance, I have not watched either the Gilbert Gottfried show or the Norm Macdonald show, and I'm subscribed to Norm Macdonald's Twitter feed. I didn't even realize that he was doing a podcast show, which makes complete sense, of course. And the thing is, go ahead.
I was going to say, when you had mentioned the pornography, it's like, it reminded me of a great line in Deadwood. It's like, I should just, he refers to them as specialties. He says, I should just be exclusive to the guys interested in specialties, and I can hang upside down like a bat from the rafters, as to just make them feel comfortable that they're not out of place. Which reminds me of, like, that is pretty much social media in a large way. That is the old internet. And that's why it makes me fucking laugh when you have the Jacks and the Marks of the world thinking, oh, we just got to make this safe for everybody. It's like, no, you're the proprietor of specialties. Hang upside down like the fucking bat that you are.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the effort to make it so milquetoast, and the problem, you see, is I see it in some YouTubers, because I concentrate and focus more on YouTube, obviously, because that's my hobby. I do YouTube videos, and so I pay attention to YouTubers. And what I notice is that the ones, as they grow in subscriber base, they not only up their production value, but they start making it just milquetoast and just smoothing out the edges. And the thing that made them good initially were those rough edges, was that DIY aesthetic. But as they grow and become more popular, they just get smoothed out, and they just get more boring, not so individual. When you go on the trending page,
my case for the most boring YouTuber is Philip DeFranco.
Yeah, you hate him.
Still think he is. I hate his. What's up, you beautiful bastards? Here's an interesting thought that I'll not have an opinion on outside of one that's obviously comfortable with everybody. Oh, but maybe I should think this way. But maybe I should think that way. You put it in the comments. I hate that. But to the credit of some weirdos, who I love, I didn't start loving them, but I appreciated them more. You had guys like PewDiePie, who was so boring and dull as far as I was concerned, dumb humor throughout much of his run. Then all of a sudden, it's like he has a shift to like more extreme politics and agitation of mainstream people. And then I'm like, well, good for him. He did the exact opposite of that normal trend, which is to say, oh, got to go to the middle and not offend everybody.
Yeah, I actually think that PewDiePie, when the Civil War comes, he's going to be on our side. And he's going to be virulently on our side, and he's going to be one of the proselytizers who's going to get a lot of the kids to be on our side, to pick up the gun and go and shoot the SJWs, right? But no, I mean, seriously, PewDiePie, I suppose, would be like the only one who's gone more towards one extreme, but I don't really follow PewDiePie. I don't understand his appeal, to tell you the truth. I find him just incredibly dull. He seems like a nice enough guy. I don't have a problem with him personally in any sense of the word. It just seems boring. I don't find him funny.
Well, he and a lot of the other Let's Players, and this kind of gets to the DIY aesthetic of YouTube and kind of what you're going after. I think for me, and everybody else is going to be different, I acknowledge, but my suspicion is a lot of what you go to YouTube for is a replication of people with shared interest that you would appreciate in an amateurish kind of way. So if you think about what those Let's Players were, it's the equivalent of having a friend over to your house while you're playing a video game, and and the goal is, in addition to just playing it well, you're going to enjoy the company of someone who will, just in the course of action, say something that'll make you laugh as you go through this. PewDiePie was certainly one of the earlier ones to do it. There was the Tobuscus guy. There's Markiplier. Go down the list of all of your favorite Let's Players. They're usually in the top of the YouTube ranks. But like I said, at the end of the day, you're not really asking for much from them, and their production rate is just suitable for the YouTube algorithm. But it's really just, hey, you're going to have a person over to play a video games, and he's going to make a he's going to occasionally make you laugh, and you're going to feel like I had someone over. It's a good time. That's not asking a lot. That's just asking for human company.
God, that's so tragic. I mean, isn't it?
Well, tragic, yes, but I mean, if you think about it as well, it's like to a certain extent. Again, when you deal with specialty interests, the odds of you finding someone who perfectly aligns, or at least marginally aligns with your interests, would have been very hard outside of some sort of social connection. So if you have this artificialness, yeah, it's sad in the sense that it's not like a person you actually know that you can interact with, but it's at least someone sharing the kind of interest. And I certainly get a laugh out of that stuff from time to time. I'm not going
Yeah,
to
but
deny
think
it.
about it. Who's the audience for PewDiePie? Who has this ersatz friend? Teenagers, little kids, right? And these kids, they're think how lonely they are. There are millions of them because his videos get like 2 to 5 million views easy. I mean, I actually don't know because I don't follow him, like I said, but he gets huge views in the millions. So you have millions of young kids, young boys mostly, who are just bored and lonely and dial up PewDiePie's channel to feel not so alone. Oh man, that's
Well,
just
I mean, I don't know that you should understand it in the sense that like, oh, without this there would be nothing. Maybe in some instances, but I think it's more a matter of, in this particular interest, I'll find an artificial relationship to kind of fulfill it. Like for me, I don't actually play video games with a lot of people in person because it's not the interest I generally have with my real life friends. But I occasionally do have that interest, and sometimes rather than playing, going to buy the game or trying to find someone to play it with me, I'll just say, oh, I'll see someone play it and get the kind of the gist of what I was looking for out of it. There's nothing more than that.
you play video games?
From time to time, yeah. I'm not a really, extensive gamer by any rate. So if you go through all the main titles, some I will know, some I don't know. There are certain games that I just enjoy playing for the sheer, release of frustration. Like I enjoy the Grand Theft Auto series as much as anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be an occasional first-person shooter game. Like I like the Doom series, and I've played recently Prey, which also was kind of fun. I don't need to go into all the details, but there's a few that I enjoy.
I have never. I have not played a video game in over a decade, at least. Actually, that's not true. The only video game I have, if you can call it that, is a game called Dots on my phone and Tetris. And I play Dots when I'm sort of like waiting and there's absolutely nothing for me to do. I mean, I don't really feel like reading, and I'm waiting for something, like usually an air, like a flight of some sort or something. Those are the only times I break out Dots, and that's the only game I ever play.
So pretty much you're a middle-aged cat woman or cat lady.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing. See, I grew up. We got a Pong in '77. I remember hooking it up to the TV and playing Pong, right? And getting pretty good at it. And that was the absolutely first video game. Okay, it had like this little box that you had to. It had a little black box, metal box, like painted on one side black with a little switch that went from side to side. It went TV, antenna, or game, and you had to hook that two leads into the leads of the antenna of your television set. Like the little stick antennas, right? And then on the other end of the box, it connected up to the video game. And it was like this little console it was a black console with two little dials, and it had like ersatz wood, on the top of it.
We know the Atari. It was was it the 6300 series? I forget the name of it, but it was the Atari series.
I don't know, but it was just Pong. It didn't play anything else. And this was in '77. And then I got the one with a cartridge, the Atari with a cartridge.
That was the 2600 series.
Okay, yeah. And I remember playing Pitfall. Pitfall was the game I got to be actually pretty good at it. And I plugged in God knows how many quarters into Defender and Asteroids. All the big coin operated games of the early '80s. I played those relentlessly with my friends, right? And it was like a big investment because you'd have to play the game and you'd plug in a quarter, and it was a quarter. And a quarter back in 1980, 81 was like at least $1 today. It was, a movie ticket cost $2.52. So, a quarter was, what's the equivalent? Yeah, about $1. And so it was like an investment. So you had to really make it last, okay? It was like, no fooling around. And then what happened? Yeah, then I moved to Chile and I kept on playing the coin operated games. But then I got into girls. And then, playing video games is just sort of stupid. And also the thing is that I realized retrospectively a lot of times I was going to play video games because I'd be hooking up with my dealer, and getting drugs basically. And that whole the scene petered out for me when I was like 16 or so. 15, 16, I just didn't bother anymore because I was into other things. I was into reading, quite frankly, in a big, big way. And so the whole issue of video games just petered out. And I to this day, I still don't understand why adults play video games. I understand it in theory, but to me, there are so many other things that can be useful distractions over video games. There's something about video games that I find, I understand it completely. I understand the need for a distraction. And I have a lot of distractions of my own. Like, I do my woodworking shit and crap like that. And that's a need for a distraction, for some mindless activity. When I'm like sanding something, I can be sanding it for hours and it just, gives me like this fugue state, which I recognize that you get from a video game. But I just don't quite get it. Okay, I mean, I still don't quite get it. I think that there are better things to be spending your time on. But that's me. Maybe I'm just an old fogey. You know what I mean?
You are just an old fogey because all you've described is an aesthetic difference of preference.
Fair enough. But okay, anyway.
But needless to say, I mean, those to be perfectly honest, the reason I brought them up is, like I said, those are the guys that really kind of moved the needle a lot on the volume of content that was being pushed out on YouTube.
Yeah,
right.
But because of the algorithm. Simple, because of the algorithm.
The algorithm, and also like they do all the kind of rules you anticipate for a lot of YouTube kind of originated from them. Not rules, but techniques and styles.
Such as
the idea of about like a video of around 10 minutes or less that you can quickly, it could be part of a series. You just move through them. You have a talking head, sometimes with a little bit of content in the corner, or vice versa. The content is main and the head is in the corner. There's running commentary on something, that's frankly not that different of a sport from the political commentators who will say, oh, what's in the news today? And then they'll pop up the bits of the news of the video and their heads in the corner talking, whatnot. It's basically the same technique. It's just different interlocutors, as it were.
I don't know. The thing this is my thinking insofar as the DIY aesthetic. I think that a lot of it gives a certain immediacy that people crave because it gives a sense that, oh, this person is real. It's not slick and produced. Like when somebody's like slickly produced, like the local TV station, there's a distancing effect when there's that kind of slick production. But when it's DIY, it feels more immediate. But it has to be the right kind of DIY because, like, for instance, Casey Neistat tried to do that Beam thing, a news organization that was sort of like a DIY aesthetic, but it was like self-consciously DIY, but very, very slickly produced. It was just a lot of thought and a lot of money to make something look thoughtless and cheap, Right. It was, and thus insincere, because fundamentally it felt insincere. And I think that's why it failed.
Much like the human eye can detect almost perfect but not perfect reproductions of human reality, and the human ear can also and eye and all working together can spot sincerity or not. And the way I always kind of think about it is it's legitimate DIY aesthetic if the risk of a hot take is real. You know what I mean? And not even a risk. It's just a hot take's likely going to come where you're not really going through the process of saying, will this hit this demographic or that demographic? Maybe you are on subconscious level, but the reality of the situation is you're like, this is kind of my attitude. I'm sticking with it. Oh, there's an audience around it. Good. So be it. I don't think that a lot of the YouTubers that I enjoy do anything but that. I mean, sure, some consider, maybe I should focus more on if the audience responds to this, I should talk more about that. But it's not as if in the moment you're constructing every last script of what you're going to say to accommodate a preconceived marketing notion of what is appropriate. You're just kind of going at it.
Yeah.
And I think, for example, that's also what all the blood sport guys have going for them, since it's a live show and it's not like they have the apparatus of CBS or whatever your broadcasting networks are, kind
Hmm.
of ensuring everything's going according to plan. It's just kind of, you're out there, and so be it.
Well, there's something else. The internet blood sports, for example, to give an example, part of it is the, of course, unpredictability of it, and it's sort of like you can go through long stretches where it's very, very boring. You listen to IBS and it just goes drones on and on, and sometimes it's practically dead air. And then all of a sudden, some guest will show up, trivial guest, but he and some other guest will go at it, and it's like a big old supernova. And it's that contrast that feels so good, okay? Because it's sort of like you're investing money into this boring show, and finally it gets good. You know what I mean? And I think that's what IBS plays into. Because, like, for example, in a regular TV show, it would always be supernova. And because it's always supernova, it's just overwhelming. And I think that a lot of times for these long shows, these streams that go on for 5 fucking hours that are just most of the time incredibly boring, it's that expectation that at some point something really amazing is going to happen. It's just going to blow everything away, and you'll have something to talk about for hours on end afterwards. I mean, like, for instance, with the Mundane Matt thing that happened recently, right? Where he was dumb enough to show the screen where he showed and proved to everybody's satisfaction that he had been flagging a bunch of people because they were saying mean things about him, right? And that was just priceless. That was prime YouTube. That was just, waiting around and waiting around and waiting around for hours and hours, because it was like over an hour that the guy had been defending himself and lying through his teeth, but nobody could prove it. And then the moment came, and it was just like, holy shit, I mean, Matt, no, that whole thing, which is just so screamingly funny. And I think that that's the thing. The fact is, you have moments of sheer lunacy in a space of emptiness. Does this make any sense?
Yeah, well, it depends also on how you define lunacy. I think you still have those. I mean, that's a manic moment for sure. I mean, like in the show that I like on Gilbert's show, it's like it's similar to that, but a little bit different. It's just the random human elements that will show up. That's kind of indifferent, removed from what you say. Oh, typically good conversations in television and talk about these exciting topics. To me, I never laughed so harder as when, like I had mentioned before, when Gilbert's talking to old Bill Macy, and
Mm-hmm.
Bill Macy's like near 90 years old, and he starts going into this rant about, like, I'm near death. I want to get into my car and get some pickled herring before I die. And he goes off of this thing about, like, he goes to this particular kind of deli and he needs to get it. And he's just, and all of this other shit. It's just like little things like that that remind you that there's actually stains
Mm-hmm.
on this actor's T-shirt as he's talking, and all of, like, the little stories they had. Like, the other thing I just generally like, and I like it in real life, and I certainly like it when it happens in a DIY aesthetic format, which is when you're it's some sort of party or you're some sort of conversation and you're hearing all the old stories of when could be famous people, could be not famous people, could be your family, and they're going through all of the old details of things that maybe you saw on television or you heard about in the news, what have you, but you're just getting the life experience of someone who lived it in a kind of non manufactured or structured kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
The Gilbert's podcast and Norm Macdonald's show do that consistently. I mean, it's the and it's different from late night, which was always, hey, we have 5 to 8 minutes with you, and you always had the likes of Jay Leno. I bring up Jay Leno because he was so terrible at it. When he was, like, going from conversation point A to point B, you could tell he didn't know how to make a good segue. It's like you could start the conversation with, like, hey, your new movie's coming out. It's like, oh, I heard this story. Does that relate when the time when you were at the beach and that idea. Like, you can't get from point A to point B in a natural kind of way. You have to force it over the 8 minutes. And in podcasts, you don't really get that. You can take their time, and that is perfectly supported through a DIY aesthetic.
Yeah. as we're talking about it, I realize that it's basically an issue of honesty, a feeling that it's real. But I wonder one thing though. If that's the thing that people crave and like, and that's what they seek, right? Why is it that public access television back in the day could not compete in terms of audience size with network TV?
Well, that's actually fairly easy. Most people didn't know where the public access station was on their dial,
You think it's
frankly.
as simple as that? But what about on YouTube and stuff? It's not obvious either when some content is something that
Well,
you
you
like.
have much more of a cultivating algorithm getting you to it, which you can't really deny. Because you go on public, because the other equivalents of DIY shows. I bring this up because it actually came up recently. Um, one of the film critics I really enjoy is a guy named Joe Bob Briggs.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe Bob Briggs, he's like a Texan, and he not like a Texan, he is a Texan,
Mm-hmm.
and he's very big on the hillbilly kind of attitude. And he's like I'm the only drive-in movie theater critic, and he used to have a show late night on TNT. It was like basic cable, and it was like the show that's like it's so late they don't really give a shit what he has to say, and he's a right wing guy. He writes for Tacky magazine, so give him credit, but. He would just say like, oh, these old like, be they drive-in movie theaters flicks like old slasher movies or old shitty horror movies. He did movies that start getting to the point where they're so bad they're good. And
Yeah.
he's just a commentator on these shows because they would appear on TNT and they had to cut out a lot of stuff. So he just talked about bullshit. He'd have like the nipple counts of the episode. How much money it made in the drive-in, little background details on the film. It's a lot like the guys who comment on the video games and movies of today. It's just that he had to do it on basic cable at late night, and people remember that. He came back actually recently, Shutter TV, which is like a streaming service that's like a competitor to the likes of Netflix, what have you, just exclusively does horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
He did his like a full day and a half long marathon. They liked it so much he's now probably going to be a regular on it again.
What's his name?
Joe Bob Briggs.
Joe Bob Briggs. Okay, I'll check him out actually.
Yeah, he's a fun guy, and that stuff happened, and it did have a popularity. It was just weird to find it. Another great example, which just fits the YouTube aesthetic perfectly, was Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Yeah.
Which also was all of those. Think of, and I bring it up as well because they come up on the Gilbert podcast as well. That you had a lot of these sort of like local hosts, who had their catalog of shitty movies that NBC or WGN had, and the likes of be they Svengoolie, Elvira, Pick Your Poison. They would have the shows on. They'd come and comment. They do their stupid gags that you could tell it was so cheap. But it was just people enjoying what they were talking about. And that's fundamentally YouTube. And that shit was popular, but in a local level. And you had to find it and you had to know it. But there's a cult audience to all that. And in the same way that you get the cult audience to the YouTube figures. Because if you really look at like our audiences at the end of the day compared to the worldwide population, we're still niche. Even the biggest players are still kind of niche.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even PewDiePie with like 60 million 60 million subscribers. That's 6% of 4% of the YouTube viewer base, because YouTube has something like 1.5 billion unique viewers a month, I think, something like that. So yeah, but still, 4% is still a sizable chunk, but it is not like 30% like shows of old used to have. Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Exactly.
But I don't know. I here's the thing. As a YouTuber, I find myself, I like upping my production value. I like making, not just buying more expensive gear. I told you privately that I've been like toying with the idea of upping my gear and going full 4K for everything, because with 4K I'll be able to do certain things. But then again, it's really not necessary. It's like, why am I blowing this money? And it's potentially a lot of money to up my gear to do 4K with better lenses would be something like, I don't know, $10,000 to $15,000, which is a lot of goddamn money for a fucking hobby, right? And a hobby should not be that expensive, especially when it's money that cannot be recouped on the tail end. Because once you buy this gear, it depreciates 50% the second you buy it. and so you're not really going to get much money out of it once you start using this gear. If you decide to sell camera gear in the future, right? And so I find it hard to justify to myself spending that kind of money on a hobby, but I still up my production value in terms of making more quality cuts, experimenting with looks and aesthetics so as to make it more quote unquote cinematic. I mean, a lot of guys on the chans, tease me and call me Coach Kino because of that, because I'm like trying to make a cinematic experience out of my little videos. And that is upping the production value, but I think that people fundamentally recognize that it's a DIY thing. I don't have a staff. I'm just doing it myself because I think it's cool. I think it's a neat little hobby. It's a neat pastime. And for my own purposes, personal purposes, it serves a goal that I'm not going to get into in this conversation because you all know it. But the point I'm trying to make is that, see, where is it that the DIY, because all of these YouTubers, as they grow, they try to improve their aesthetic. They try to improve the production value of their shows. Where is it that you think it sort of like crosses the line? Where does it go wrong? When they start hiring people to make it better? Do you think that that's it?
No, I think it starts becoming a question of intent more than the actuality. I think you can still, like I said, I cite the Norms show as an example. He certainly has a staff, but it doesn't come across that he's adopted a well-oiled machine that's orchestrating thought and content in a cynical way, like a major production would.
Mm-hmm.
I think once you start having that cynical attitude, people start noticing. And I would say you don't even need to start exiting the DIY aesthetic per se to start becoming that cynical. Like I had said, I am pretty sure there are types of people on YouTube who say, this topic I'll cover more than that topic because I know the audience needs that, or I'll make these same type of assessments of certain subjects because I know they're easier and they'll be less controversial, or hey, I need to grow this demographic because that's the demographic that does well for the algorithm. It doesn't matter, whatever it is. And so you operate accordingly. I think once the attitude is more around, I'm going to grow this audience in a really kind of artificial way and not an organic way, you've already breached the seal of trust or confidence.
Okay, but growing your audience, right? That would mean, like, for instance, trimming your content to appeal to your audience, right?
Well, let me put it this way. I could tell the difference as soon as someone's, when someone exits their, I see this happen where they may have started out DIY and then they get to that point where it says like, oh, after every video, oh, like and subscribe to this, click this button here and this button there, and be sure to give me a shout on this, and the Patreon's over here. It's like when you get to that, like it's 2 minutes of that on a 6-minute video, you know exactly what you're doing, what you're getting into. And the other example is when, and I know guys I like do this, but what the hell, I'm just going to call it out as I see it. As soon as they start saying, you should download this game, I get sponsorship from this game, and you could tell they're reading copy that is given to them.
Yeah,
that's also breaking the feeling of DIY trust as well. It's very much, like I said, a lot of these things don't really, in my mind, have a nice demarcation line. I think it's more of an attitude and a kind of perception situation.
Oh,
and
no,
the best way I could kind of describe it is when the breach of trust occurs. And I can give you examples on how that manifests itself.
I agree that it is a spectrum. Okay, I'm not denying the existence of the black and white. I'm saying, where is it in the gray that you sort of like draw the line, or if it's a staggered line that sort of like is all over. It's not a straight line; it's a squiggly line because of the reality of the situation. Because sometimes you have like certain guys, like I follow Geeks and Gamers, right? I don't watch all of their content, but I'm subscribed and I check out whenever a title pops up that's interesting to me, or a take is interesting to me. And the thing is, Geeks and Gamers was a channel started by this guy, Jeremy, and he said outright from the get-go that he wanted to have a successful YouTube channel. He wanted to have a lot of subscribers and a lot of views and, do something that he thought was fun. And he started talking about gaming and geek culture and stuff like that. And then he hit on Star Wars. And he started, and those videos got like a huge response. So he started doing just more and more Star Wars. And now it's pretty much a 24/7 Star Wars operation. I don't have a problem with that. Perhaps because he was very honest from the get-go. He was saying, I want to have a successful YouTube channel. Uh, I can respect that. I guess if somebody had said, "Oh, I'm just doing it for the lulsies, and just for fun," and "Oh, you like Star Wars, so I'll do more Star Wars," and that attitude, I would have been very negative towards that attitude, as opposed to Geeks and Gamers, who was very upfront. I think there's a certain issue of honesty, even if your intent is to just make a successful YouTube and make something that is a moneymaker. If that's your honest intention and you're making no bones about it, I don't have a problem with that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, I guess it's a matter of there's no open deception at a certain point, but there are also some people who I just know. Like I said, I don't think Philip DeFranco is being dishonest by any means, but
Oh
I also
no.
think I think it's just as vapid and empty as any kind of quote unquote mainstream show.
Yeah, it's mainstream for YouTube crowd. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the YouTube crowd is not the same as the normie crowd, on the real
Well,
world.
the thing is, that, like, if you told me that Philip DeFranco had a show on, I don't even know if this channel exists anymore, I would not be surprised.
Sure. Yeah. Does E exist or no longer?
That's why I laughed. I don't know.
I haven't watched
I'm
it in
really
years.
dating myself because
Yeah.
like that was back at the time when I watched cable and we
Yeah.
can the Greg Kinnear on Talk Soup.
Yeah, yeah. That was a great show. I liked it, and I liked it when Joel McHale was on. I also heard that Michelle Wolf had a show and it got canceled by Netflix, but also Joel McHale had a show on Netflix and it too got canceled.
Yeah, because Netflix hasn't been able to figure out how to do the late night talk show and make it work in their platform. And I would platform. Can I? This is a tangent, but I think we overuse the word platform in the tech industry. Everybody has a fucking platform. Nobody knows what the fuck it means.
Okay,
They
be
just think it's
careful. Be
awesome.
careful with that kind of talk, or I'm going to deplatform you right the fuck now.
Everybody's gonna burn. I'm gonna be the Joker and just say some men just like watching the world burn.
Yeah,
I like watching platforms burn.
yeah.
And but anyway, needless to say, Netflix has it's certainly somewhere in between like a mainstream thing and a internet social media kind of thing because it's like a out there service, not out there, but it's not. It didn't come out in like a mainstream kind of way. It still has the vibe of like, hey, we're the kids in the AV club doing kind of weird things. Don't you
Who?
want to be part of
Netflix?
our kind of club? Yeah, yeah. Netflix does not come across like any kind of mainstream channel in a lot of important ways. And so I would think that pulling in the likes of Norm Macdonald's style is much better suited to what they can do because I don't think that super polished late night show when you add in this sort of condescension of the left wing political bias is going to do you any good. Because it extenuates the hypocrisy and the feeling of not betrayal, but like dishonesty, right? There's a distancing from the audience and the creator. And really, you don't. This is just isn't the world that is conducive to that. That's one of the positive benefits of YouTube, podcasts, what have you. Like you said, the gatekeepers are gone, but also just the general notion of you have to have this attitude in order to be successful in this world. That's gone, right? So take
Well,
advantage of it.
yeah. Although I have noticed that a lot of these YouTube creators, at least, I can speak for YouTubers, like I said before, a lot of them wind up trapped by their own success because they hit on a particular formula that is successful and they cannot evolve and they're locked into it. And like Medicare did this great video on this guy, this gamer called Wings of something or other. And it was about this fat guy who played this video game all day. Okay, and that was his shtick, right? And he was stuck because he had gotten a lot of money out of this, tens of thousands of dollars a month playing this video game. And so he was stuck playing this video game. Apparently, he wasn't even a very good video gamer, but people liked watching him because every once in a while he would like have like mini tantrums, and he'd have like meltdowns and shit because he hated the life that he had. It was reduced to playing this video game, which he hated, but it was the only thing that was successful for him. And so he didn't have any other out, which I thought was a very peculiar postmodern kind of hell. You know what I mean? Like a postmodern prison sentence of some sort. That a man is forced to play video games because he can't earn a living any other way. And it's a video game that he hates. I mean, that's a bizarre Kafka-esque story if ever I heard one, right? But I think that there are a lot of YouTubers who are sort of like that. They are stuck playing one character. And the thing is, the ones I really hate, the ones that I despise with a passion, are these like shiny, happy people. Like Casey Neistat, as of late, he's like that. He's totally faking being happy. Because in the early years of his thing, I think he was genuinely happy to be making these videos. But now it's just a grind, and it's like a fake happiness, and you can tell, or at least I can tell. And there's like others. There's a guy called Peter McKinnon. He's a Canadian. He's a photographer guy, and he does very good photography. But the problem is that the guy is so fucking fake. He's fake, shiny, happy, and a lot of the YouTubers have this vibe to them of just being shiny, happy people, and everything is happy, happy, happy. You ever heard of this guy Roman Atwood? Who's got some family, and he's making a ton of fucking money off of his his vlogs and stuff and merchandising and all the rest of it. I mean, just making tons of money. And the guy's just like upbeat, super upbeat all the time. He always shows off these new toys that he and his family got. I mean, him and his family are living this like Disneyland existence. And well, as I'm talking, I realize the appeal because it's people living vicariously through them and tuning in every once in a while to hear them and feeling, the happy vibe. But I would go insane. I mean, I think it's a peculiar hell, to tell you the truth. You see what I'm saying? Or am I talking out of my ass?
Well, I don't disbelieve you. I don't know that there's anything egregiously particular about it, in terms of our time or whatnot. I think everybody, even Mozart had to be the little monkey that danced, right? Whenever they wanted him to.
Yeah.
That's the nature of entertainment in a lot of ways. I mean, think about the old Hollywood or old television, so and so gets a reputation as being this kind of actor, this type of comedian. That's stuck. That's what you did. It was especially in the studio system. What's interesting to me is not that, we have a particular postmodern hellscape where you have to be happy, as much as, the peculiarities of our environment haven't really changed that universal observation that dance monkey dance when people figure out what they like about you. And that's kind of what it's done. So like I do know, that's probably true. A lot of people kind of get stuck in that. And when you have the nice, they brought a dump truck of money to my house, I'm not made of stone, kind of attitude, you're gonna get stuck like that. But that's the other thing to keep in mind. I think the creative mind has to keep in mind is that the vast majority of people in the world don't really find joy in their work. It's just the vast nature of being a human being in this time and age. Some people enjoy what they do and have a pleasure at it. Other people are okay with it, and other people just hate their job. So they're looking for a very specific kind of entertainment. And so if that results in you having to put on the monkey suit and dance, even though you don't like it, well, you're not going to get a lot of sympathy from a lot of people. I mean, and the DIY aesthetic doesn't really help you one way or the other once people have a sense of what they want about you. I think what you could use it to your advantage is, you could have the attitude that says, I'm going to continue to do what I want to do. And some people will love you for that. The risk you have is, hey, you may not have as big of an audience that when you did the predictable thing. But that's always true of any entertainment. So,
yeah, but going back to this DIY, I don't see it ending anytime soon. I think it's only starting. to tell you the truth.
No, it won't end. Yeah, it will never end. It's because it's I can't conceive of the go forward model where we have true strict gatekeeping. We'll have some kinds of gatekeeping in the sense that YouTube will try to censor away people who make the platform unsafe. But
Yeah.
with the genies out of the bottle, there will continue to be alternatives. Even if BitChute or Minds has a small audience, the people who become aware of the wilder and crazier people in those alternative places will attract the audience
Yeah.
one way or another. It'll be small at first, but eventually it will grow. So there's no way you're putting that genie back. There's no way the gatekeepers will once again hold dominion over all possible forms of entertainment.
No.
I think YouTube has effectively mainstreamed the public access television in a way that will never be removed from the mind of the human being.
No, not at all. I think that the gatekeepers really are dead, and we're just in the death throes of them. And I think that what will start to happen is that in other media too, it'll become less and less about gatekeeping. Because, like, for example, I floated a question to my audience as to whether they'd be interested in purchasing a book of essays that I was thinking of like putting together, because there's some pieces that I wrote way back when, and maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't, but that's not the issue. I got almost 3,000 responses. Let me just check it real quick now that we're talking. Something like 3,000 responses, and a third said, 35%, 65% said, no, I'm good with just your videos. It was a yes/no question. The yes was, yes, I'd buy an ebook of your essays, which is like not a very popular thing. And the other was, and that was deliberately so. And the other was, no, I'm good with just your videos. Now the no answer was 65%, but the yes was 35%. It was 1,000 people who voted. And, I have an audience at this time of, about 65,000 subscribers. So it's usually the case of like, the people who vote on these things or comment is usually about a 10-to-1 ratio. So basically, out of 30,000 people, 3,000 people took the time to vote, and 1,000 are saying, yes, I'd buy it. Now, if I were to put out a book and I net, say for the sake of argument, $4 per copy, that would be $4,000. I mean, it would be worthwhile. And nobody's stopping me, because producing a book is a minimum, apart from the actual writing of it. But just putting it together, there are some programs. I think one of them, like a more pro version to e-publish a book, costs like $50. Okay, I mean the production costs of such a book are minimal. You could actually hire somebody to do the whole process for you for less than a couple of $100, and it would be a very good return on investment. And so it seems to me that in every art form, we're going to have less and less gatekeeping, which is really good. But the thing that worries me, though, or not worries me, but I have to note, is that because of this lack of gatekeeping, because there is going to be so much diffusion insofar as what's popular, there isn't going to be a common culture. We're not.
No, I've said that. I've already said that before. I agree with you. I think it's at this point hard to reconcile for a few reasons. One, to your point, lack of gatekeepers certainly isn't going to help that. It will actually accelerate it. But the other factor is that all of those underlying shared opinions, or at the very least shared aesthetic principles and morals, are being removed independent of whether or not they're gatekeepers, right? It's like, oh, there's nothing particularly special about, I'll use the obvious example, white culture or white middle America culture. But you could also say that equally true of like, there's nothing particular about being black. There's nothing particular about being Chinese or what have you. Go through your list. What that ultimately means is that foundation of shared aesthetic judgment is gone.
Yeah.
And there's no basis to have a shared culture, because there's frankly what I've always said is the commercial preference is that there is no culture, because culture is just a limiting factor on what could be sold at the end of the day. So you do have a positive and negative outcome of this. Positive being, well, you're going to have a lot to choose from, my friend. The negative is, well, there's going to be no shared value system, and you're never, if you could be cynical and say, well, it means you'll never get a big audience. That's only part of it.
Mm.
But the other negative part of it is like you'll never get an audience that will have the critical mass to really not just appreciate what you're doing, but build off of it. Because like part of the success of art isn't just a creative manifestation of one's soul in a vacuum. It is a product of the society you live in, the inputs that you receive from the other art that you appreciate, and that builds upon into your work, and then that goes out into the world, and people continue to build on it. It's the crux or the metaphysical crux of why Harold Bloom writes a book like The Anxiety of Influence. He's talking about the mechanics of how the interconnection of human beings through their art gets itself done. And when you don't have a culture that provides the sort of railroad tracks to get from point A to point B, that's harder and harder to do. And the negative consequence of that is there's actually less and less art that's important, even though there are no gatekeepers and you have a greater opportunity to do what you want to do. You're losing your tools in order to make better and better art. So that's the catch 22.
Well, but I'm thinking of something else. The whole notion of gatekeeping, okay, of centralized distribution nodes, it really started in the 19th century. Maybe you can go back to the 18th century, sort of, but it's really a 19th century phenomenon, 19th and 20th century phenomenon. But before that, I'm thinking like the Middle Ages, not the Middle Ages, rather the Renaissance, right? The Renaissance, the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, where you had art that was spread out all over the place, and it was hard to come by. But there were certain works of art that sort of like percolated to the top, and everybody was like, "Yes, this is good. This is valuable." Like Boccaccio's Decameron, like Dante's Divine Comedy. That I'm sure there were tons and tons of religious people, nuns and priests with a lot of time on their hands who produced a lot of work that just didn't make it because it wasn't considered as good, and it wasn't as good. I mean, objectively, you can tell that the Divine Comedy is a better crafted piece of work than a lot of other contemporary writings. I mean, contemporary to Dante, right? And you could say, yes, of course, the Divine Comedy deserves to be remembered and all this other stuff forgotten because it's boring. I know this for a fact because I took a class in college about Dante Alighieri, and we had to read some of like contemporary poetry, and it was just so boring and dull and just didn't get the job done at all. Not the way that the Divine Comedy did. I mean, it was noticeable. It was like a head and shoulders issue of the Divine Comedy being better than its contemporaneous competitors, if you will. Do you think that something like that can happen today, where people are going to start to realize, something? Yeah, sure, this is more popular, that's more popular, whatever, and there's all this stuff all over the place, but this here and that there, this is the best of this whole medium. You see what I'm saying?
Well, it's going to be harder and harder to do for the reasons I mentioned, because what are you basing your judgments on? You're basing your judgments on knowledge of and a shared understanding of what has been good and what hasn't been good. And remember that postmodern attitudes towards literature is to kind of reject that completely. They don't even necessarily care about the artistry.
Yeah. Of course,
They care about that, and not to mention the other fact that was contributing to the cultivation that was happening during the Renaissance was that there was still limited economic sponsorship of a lot of this, right? The church produced most of the paintings because they could afford it. The merchants did for similar reasons. The printing press, while in existence, still, a book isn't, available to your average layman. And by the way, your average layperson couldn't read to begin with. So you have that limiting factor. So it's easier for people to stress and assess that this is going to be the good one. This is less good. And I just fundamentally believe if you don't read Shakespeare and you haven't taught Shakespeare, you haven't read Dante, or you don't even know what Dante is referencing, you don't even know who the fuck this Virgil guy is.
Yeah.
Taking someone through on what ground are you going to stand confidently and say this is the good work?
Well, no,
I don't think you have it.
why not? I mean, we can tell that there are some YouTubers who are better, who are just, aesthetically better and more interesting.
How do you define the aesthetic criteria?
Well, no, I mean, often it's not, you can't like define it, I'll go with a Potter Stewart Dodge, but you can tell that it is better. Like, for instance, you can tell that iDubbbz pieces tend to be better than most other YouTubers, even though the DIY aesthetic is even more prevalent, even though it's shittier production value. But you can tell that there is an inherent quality to his work that is superior to a lot of other YouTubers, and I'm sure
Well,
there are others as well.
I just that just seems like a fundamental dodge to me. I mean, like, how did you get to the point where are able to know that?
Well, because like,
Because because whenever you're measuring something, you
mhm,
are always using a measuring stick.
right,
That measuring stick is not owned by your private soul. That measuring stick is shared by
yeah,
the culture around you. And so when you don't have a culture around you agreeing on that, or at least helping you come to that understanding, you're measuring like, oh, I it's 3 fingers more. What does that mean? It means nothing.
mm.
You see what I'm saying?
I'm not so sure because you're basically saying that that all aesthetic measurements are relative as I understand what you're saying that a society's opinion about a work of art is what matters.
What I am suggesting is that even if you can't create that ex nihilo because it just means nothing, you can certainly behave as if it's absolute or that the individual can inherently recognize it. But fundamentally, it's the uniform collection of people who share it. And even if you're the ultimate arbiter of
Uh-huh.
what is good or not, you're still fundamentally basing it on the fact that I know creator A is the best because I've seen creators B, C, D, and E. And I know what they all do together. I know how to correlate the two. And I know that there's a shared goal, or if it's not explicit goal, there's a shared metaphysical goal or
Mm-hmm.
what have you that they're striving for.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't fundamentally acknowledge even that, you have no basis for judgment. It's just, oh, ships passing through the night. And then your final aesthetic judgment is near pornographic, which is to say, what satiates my physical need at this time?
Mm-hmm.
Do I need something who's the best at putting me to sleep? Who's the best at getting my dick hard?
Mm-hmm.
All of that other things. You can't dismiss away the shared notions of how you come to define your success or how you come to define success, period.
So you're basically saying that because of this elimination of gatekeeping and everything being just like all of this content being spread out and produced all over the place, that we'll never be able to uh, divine or identify the better ones. Is that what you're basically saying?
I'm not saying that gatekeeping is the ultimate and only cause of it. I said at the beginning that it is other factors that are undermining that shared notion. The lack of gatekeeping is an accelerant, if only for the fact that there is more and more content you have to sift through now. And like I said, that's not necessarily in and of itself a bad thing. But when you undermine the shared notions of judgment, you definitely are not going to come very easily to an aesthetic criteria or conclusion. Especially, like I said, what will ultimately happen, and it ultimately is happening, is that the little niche crowds gather around the little niche crowds and in their own little niche ways come to their judgments about their own little niche content. But beyond that, if I tell people, who enjoy Let's Plays that Let's Plays aren't very aesthetically pleasing, they'll say, "You fucking fag! What the fuck do you know?" You know what I mean? That's the manifestation of, fuck you. The only shared aesthetic judgments that we acknowledge are the people in our crowd. There you go.
Mm. I kind of like disagree. I think that what happens is that each of us individually arrives at a ranking of the work by the sheer fact that we, consume media, to put it in blunt terms, that, okay, look at this term. You start reading, right? And you read, whatever books. And at some point, in your teens, you start reading more adult books. And you read, I don't know, I'm just picking a name out of the hat, Little Women. Okay, that's a typical book that, well, most girls read it when they're like 13 or whatever. And you read it and you think it's a great book. And then you read Gone with the Wind. And you think that Gone with the Wind is a better book than Little Women for whatever reason, right? And you keep on adding to the stock of books that you have in your head because you keep on reading more and more. And you perhaps might not have an aesthetic theory, a coherent aesthetic theory. But you start to realize by the time you read, say, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, you can say quite calmly and with some self-assurance that Portrait of the Artist is a better written book than Gone with the Wind. You might say that, Gone with the Wind is a more entertaining book, but certainly the Joyce book is superior on aesthetic level to the Margaret Mitchell book. But you don't need an aesthetic theory to be able to say that. It's just the very fact of the mileage that you're gaining by all the reading that you're doing. You start being able inherently to compare books and figure out what is more valuable. And
see, I used to think that way, but to this as of now, I think that is the arrogant assumption of the educated class to assume that everybody will share our opinion. I cannot tell you how many times,
but they
I've
do.
encountered random. No, you got to let me finish. I
Okay.
keep saying that how many times that I've encountered people on whatever content sites, or whatever forum you want to have, and they could read or have encountered all of the books you said, and they'll still think the Hardy Boys is the best work of art they've ever seen. People think that the superhero book superhero movies are the best that Hollywood has ever produced, and they've encountered the other films. They've seen Citizen Kane.
But
they may not appreciate it, but they've seen it.
Yeah,
you can't assume that just because they went to that we went to our specific kinds of schools and we had our specific kinds of classes, we had our specific kind of people, that everybody's going to think like us. It just doesn't happen.
Well, no, I disagree because for instance, you and I have trivial disagreements insofar as what books we consider good or not. Like, for example, I think that of Mailer's books, the best thing that he probably ever wrote was Executioner's Song, and you think it's Harlot's Ghost, right? In the scheme of things, this is a trivial discrepancy. I mean, it really is. But in the big, questions, we both, for instance, categorically believe that Norman Mailer is anything that Norman Mailer wrote is better than the Hardy Boys, and it's because you and I have both read enough that we can say that unequivocally and uncontroversially. It seems to me that there is a universality to aesthetic judgment. I think that this is ultimately this discussion we're having right now.
No, but you're ignoring the fact that you and I both went to the same type of schools, had the same type of education.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
No, it does matter. It does fucking matter, because that's who we are.
No. I disagree.
You're not going to pull some guy out of the crowd who's never, shared that kind of experiences that we have shared, and he will agree with us on the aesthetic issues 100%.
If we picked a guy from the 19th century, a well-read guy, say a Frenchman, who somehow we teach him English like that from the 19th century, okay, a Frenchman from the 19th century, and we teleport him to today, and we teach him English instantly, and we shove him, a bunch of books. His judgment is likely to be very similar to yours and mine.
But you're also ignoring the fact that we are institutionalizing within him, through our engagement with him, through our teaching of him, all of the fundamental shared notions that we're going to have. The best example is pull someone out of Africa,
right,
and just plop them in, and you'll see their judgments differ from us very quickly. For example, Chinua Achebe, he keeps on going on about Joseph Conrad's book, not very good, bloody racist. Because it didn't talk about him.
Which book?
Benway, the Nigerian author, does not like Conrad's Heart of Darkness, because he thinks it's fundamentally a bloody racist book. And if you read between the lines, what he's really saying is, the Africans are not the subject of the book.
Yeah,
we don't share your opinions. We don't share your experience.
Yeah, he's basically having a political hissy fit. Okay, and
I think it's a political hissy fit, but it's also fundamental of his identity. He cannot comprehend or appreciate or accept a world in which white people write what books for white people.
I don't know. That guy in particular, how you're describing him, he's basically throwing a political hissy fit and shitting all over a writer just because of
No, I
the
think his
politics.
problem is more than just politics. I think he just fundamentally does not recognize the European perspective. Full stop.
Mm.
Politics is a manifestation of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And let's be perfectly honest about what's happening here. We are becoming so atomized and so distanced from each other and so specific in what we want that what have hitherto been, little niche differences are becoming more substantial differences,
Yeah.
in part because all of the shared engagement we would normally have with people goes away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gatekeeping is just a symptom. Gatekeeping didn't cause this, or lack thereof. What really caused it was a lot of undermining of any notion of collective building of shared, aesthetics and whatnot.
Well, it's my thinking goes to the fundamental concept of the nation state that we have, that the nation state should take care of its citizens. It's a notion that I just do not believe, and I think that notion of the nation state taking care of its citizens, materially taking care of them, is what's undermined this collective this collective art outlook, and also it's undermined a whole host of other things. Individual responsibility. The disintegration of the family unit, not just the nuclear family, but the extended family. Because the state can take care of you, the state is taking care of you, and I think that's been catastrophic. And I think that I could argue, I suppose, that it's what's undercut this collective culture, and has helped to atomize the culture. Because since we're all individuals and the state is taking care of us on an individual basis, then we can, as individuals, wander off into our own individual niches, far and away from one another, without any need to connect with the majority of people in our society.
I think that's true. I mean, it is the notion that your freedom is defined through your consumption. At the end of the day, you unimpeded by any arbitrary notions of morality and whatnot. And what they mean by arbitrary notions of morality is culturally developed attitudes that have pre-existed you as an individual. Part of the reason I was so adamant in response to your individuals will figure it out is because it seems to be the aesthetic equivalent of the magic dirt theory, which is, once everybody comes to America, they can become an American.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's just figure it out. It's just magic dirt that does it.
Yeah.
It's that your theory feels to operate under the same level within an aesthetic point of view. There's something just fundamentally human we all recognize about it, perhaps on some level, but I think in many ways not. I think fundamentally you did hit the nail on the head, that focus on, what, your individual ability to do whatever you want, to define your own success. Think of all the commercials you've ever seen in your life, about the freedom to go on this adventure, to do this thing. It's usually just freedom to buy an Acura.
Yeah.
The freedom to buy these Gap chinos, what have you. That will fundamentally break, like I said, those shared bonds, because part of the idea of judgment is to say, this is not worth your time, this is worth your time. And for those people who are trying to make a buck on this is not worth your time, they don't like that. They'll fight you tooth and nail, and they'll fight it whatever way they want. And one of the most successful strategies they've had is, your capricious, arbitrary rules. How dare you say that my comic book is not as important as Tolstoy? That's just wrong. I made him Jewish for some reason.
I was wondering about that. Yeah. And Stan Lee doesn't sound like that at all.
No, Stan Lee does not sound like that at all. Well, actually, he does, but just a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah. But hang on a second. Aren't you basically, with that argument that you're making, you're basically saying that you do agree that there is an inherent standard that we would all agree, an inherent aesthetic standard that we would naturally all agree with. That is, that Tolstoy is better than comic books.
I would say if we had the fundamental agreement that our culture had defined for the past several hundred years, or at least 150-ish years since Tolstoy died, then yes, I would say we could reach that conclusion. But those tools have been torn asunder over the past 100 years.
Or the past 30 years, I would say. But okay.
Even more, I mean, Nietzsche understood this was happening. So I
Yeah,
say
okay.
100.
Well, yeah, fair enough. It doesn't really matter when it started. It's we're living in it now. Uh, okay, so this is another black pilled episode.
Not entirely, because like my approach is to say, you know what, um, if you if you did not undermine those cultural aesthetic norms, let's say they were there, the plethora of content is even better, because the gatekeepers at any given point in time may or may not necessarily be aligned with the judgments that the collective group may have, right? And this sometimes, this often has happened recently, where, and you see it, and this is part of why people hate mainstream media, right? The general populace has an attitude of what they think of as right or wrong, or what they want to see on the news or not, what they think of as important to the country. But the media gatekeepers say, no, no, we're doing this now. This is what he wants. And I'm going to bust you over the fucking head until you respond like a dog in Pavlov's experiment to what I said. Now, I believe there has been, for a while now, when you did have gatekeepers in the various media, a situation where, yes, there were traditional standards of aesthetic judgment. They were dying off, but you could still remember what they were. But they were fighting against it. Said, no, you have to have this kind of book, this kind of postmodernist literature of whatever shape, this book about, a pussy guy talking about his feelings rather than fucking, David Foster Wallace versus John Updike, what have you. Pick whatever frame of reference you want. They worked very hard to undermine those standards. But if you had the standards protected from them, you would want to fight the gatekeepers. And the best way you fight that is the volume of art that is against what they want, that people still can get to, would have undermined their ability to control the narrative. My point is that unfortunately they were smarter than I would have given them credit to, which is they undermined the standards first. Then it doesn't really matter at that point whether they're gatekeepers or not.
So what do you think is going to be happening moving forward?
I would not be surprised if, in parallel to a notion of people fighting for some sort of unified cultural identity, paired with that becomes the aesthetic goals tied to it. In fact, I think the aesthetic goals will come first. By that, it's not too dissimilar when Paul Joseph Watson says of the right-wing minded people, we're the new counterculture in terms of an art.
Yeah.
He was right on some sense that in order to counteract the dead space of the mass media around you, you have to reach a critical mass of defining your own aesthetics going forward, and from that will emerge a politics.
Yeah, in order to define an aesthetic, you need the actual content for that aesthetic.
Yes, and I think we certainly are in process or in a position to start making it. I'm willing to bet it's already made. It's now a question of trying to recongeal critical mass around that.
Yeah. Okay, so this has been a really interesting conversation. I didn't think that we would go in this direction. A final note, to tell you the truth, my great concern, and this is going to sound, it's going to sound stupid until you think about it a little bit. My great concern about so much of the art that's being created right now, and I do consider a lot of the stuff that's happening on YouTube, for instance, the original content being produced on YouTube, some of it is really artful. Some of it, and potentially it could be even more artful and more interesting on an artistic level. My concern is that it'll disappear because it's electronic. And as everybody knows, electronic media tends to decay very quickly. You can have a book sitting on a shelf for 100 years and you can still read it. Ditto with a painting. There are paintings that are 1,000 years old and we still appreciate them. But the electronic media that we have today it can decay very easily. It's very, very fragile. And my suspicion is that most of the stuff that is produced today let me rephrase that. All of the stuff that is produced today, none of it will exist in 200 years unless at some point between now and then, heroic measures are taken to preserve at least the better exemplars of the current work. You see what I mean? I mean, ebooks, YouTube videos, podcasts, all the rest of it. It's just ones and zeros, and they are so fragile. You have CDs from the 80s. I had some old CDs, and I picked up one, and it's something happened to the goddamn plastic, and it's unplayable now. And it wasn't a particular.
It is a rot. It happens sometimes on optical discs.
Yeah, I have no idea what it was, but it was just like the plastic, was all splotchy, and I tried to play it on multiple players, and it was just, and it wasn't like a big deal. It was an old recording of a Gregorian chant, as a matter of fact, and I can pull the exact same recording. I can pull it off of YouTube instantly, so it meant nothing. I mean, and on top of that, the CD I bought it like in '91, and it was it was in the discount bin at the time. I remember when I bought it because it was in the discount bin. I didn't have much money, and so yeah, I bought it at the discount bin, for like $4 at the time, and I've enjoyed it ever since. And obviously, therefore, it wasn't a very valuable recording. And like I said, multiple versions of those Gregorian chants are available online, including the one I actually had. So no loss on my part, but that concern that all of the media will vanish. That is a little bit of a black pill thought to hold.
I don't know that I'm so pessimistic about that, in part because I just think the reproducibility of the ones and zeros kind of mitigates against that. I'm more worried about the degree to which someone can make it disappear.
Oh yeah, that too.
Particularly like, YouTube can just say, oh, you're not a good person, I take away. And same thing with Amazon and whatnot. There's something to be said of having a physical book or VHS tape or whatever
you remember,
it was,
you remember
passing it on.
That 1984 issue with Amazon a few years ago?
Yeah, when they disappeared, or no, I forgot what they did. They did something to.
I remember. Yeah, what happened was that they had sold a version, an edition of George Orwell's 1984 to people, and there was some snafu with copyright or something like that, and so it was basically what Amazon did was it went to all the Kindles and took away that copy and credited people's account. And somebody pointed out the fact it was like somebody like Barnes and Noble had gone to your house, stolen your book, but left the cash on the mantelpiece.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
For the book they'd stolen. Yeah, it was like, what the fuck? And on top of that, it was 1984. I mean, the ultimate.
Exactly, and it's one of those funny situations where I'm pretty sure Amazon didn't truly do it out of malicious intent. They did it out of legal reasons, but it manifested the power that they have.
Yeah. It manifested in a way that was fucking creepy as fuck. But oh well.
And it manifested itself in an Orwellian fashion. And I remember everybody acknowledging, "Well, that seems like an ironic title to have to do it." And I kind of laughed. I said, "Yeah, you're fucking losers, because when it really happens, you'll do nothing and say nothing."
Yeah. That's my thinking too. That. Yeah,
because there'll always be some shithead who says, "Well, Amazon has no obligation to
it's a private
keep your
company
books on the platform," or like that's like saying like, "Oh, the paper company has no obligation to ensure that that book printed on that paper is for you from now on in time memoriam. They have the right to go into your house and take it from you." I can take the logic doesn't that require that much of a stretch for some asshole to start making things like that, saying things like that.
Yeah. Okay. So on that note, we're going to call it a podcast, because the thing is, I'm realizing that I'm getting more and more black pilled, and I'm going through my head and trying to figure out a way to not turn it more black pilled, but I can't. All roads lead to hell. So that's why before we take that final leap into oblivion, I'm going to call it a podcast. So this has been the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Red Pill. I've been joined here by my co-host, Dr. Benway. And as always, I'm going to leave Dr. Benway with the final word.
Everything burns.
Excellent choice. Excellent choice. Take it easy, guys.
Later.